Christians are crucifying Christ by St. Bridget of Sweden. The following Virgo Potens production is a narrated video of chapters 37 to 39 from Book 1 of Prophecies and Revelations by St. Bridget of Sweden, narrated by Tony Capobianco. The words of the Virgin Mother to the bride about the excellence of her Son, and about how Christ is now being crucified more cruelly by his enemies, the evil Christians, than he once was by the Jews, and about how such people will receive a harder and more bitter punishment. Chapter 37. The Queen of Heaven said, "My Son had 3 good things. The first one was that no one ever had such a beautiful body as he did, since he had 2 perfect natures, namely, his divinity and manhood. His body was so pure that, just as no stain can be found in the clearest of eyes, so not a single defect could be found on his body. The second good was that he never sinned. Other children, however, sometimes bear the sins of their parents, and sometimes their own, but he never sinned, and yet bore the sins of everyone. The third good was that some men die for the sake of God, and to receive a greater reward. But he died just as much for the sake of his enemies, as for me and his friends. When his enemies crucified him, they did 4 things to him. First, they crowned him with a crown of thorns. Second, they pierced his hands and feet. Third, they gave him gall to drink. Fourth, they pierced his side. But now I complain that the enemies of my Son, who are now in the world, crucify him more cruelly in a spiritual sense than the Jews who crucified his body. For even though the divinity is unable to suffer and die, still they crucify him through their own vices and sins. For if a man insults and injures an image of his enemy, the image does not feel the damage done to it. Nevertheless, the perpetrator should be accused and judged for his evil intention to do harm, as though it was a deed. In the same way, the vices and sins by which they crucify my Son spiritually are more abominable and heavy to him than the vices of those who crucified his body. But now you may ask, how did they crucify him? First off, they fasten him on the cross they have prepared for him when they do not heed the commandments of their Creator and Lord, but dishonor him when he warns them through his servants to serve him. And they despise this, and instead do what pleases them. Then they crucify his right hand, when they hold justice to be as injustice, saying, 'Sin is not so heavy and abominable to God as it is said. God does not punish anyone for all eternity. He only threatens us with these hard things to scare us. Why else would he redeem man if he wanted us to perish?' They do not consider that the least little sin a man finds delight in is enough to damn him to an eternal torment, and that God does not let the least little sin go unpunished, just like he does not let the least little good deed go unrewarded. Therefore, they shall be tormented for all eternity because of their constant intention of sinning, and my Son, who sees the heart, counts that as a deed. For they would fulfill their will with deeds if my Son tolerated or allowed it. Then they crucify his left hand when they turn virtue into sin, and the will to continue in sin until the end, saying, 'If we just once say at the end of our life, O God, have mercy on me,' God's mercy is so great that we will be forgiven. But this is not virtue. To want to sin without bettering oneself, and wanting to receive a reward without having to work for it, not unless a real contrition is found in the heart that the man wants to change, if only he could do so, were it not for illness or some other hindrance. Thereafter, they crucify his feet when they take pleasure in sinning without once thinking of my Son's bitter suffering, or without once thanking him from their inmost heart with words like these, 'My Lord and God, how bitter your suffering was. Praise and honor be to you for your death. Such words are never heard from their mouth. Then they crown him with the crown of derision when they mock his servants, and consider it useless to serve him. They give him gall to drink when they rejoice and glory in sin. And not once does the thought arise in their heart of how grave and manifold and dangerous this sin is. They pierce his side when they have the will to continue in sin. In truth, I tell you, and you can say this to my friends, that such people are more unjust in the sight of my Son than those who judged him, more unkind than those who crucified him, more shameless than those who sold him, and they shall therefore receive a greater torment than the others. Pilate knew very well that my Son had not sinned, and did not deserve to die, but he, nonetheless, felt compelled to judge my Son to death, because he feared the loss of his worldly power and the revolt of the Jews. But what would these have to fear if they served my Son? Or what honor or dignity would they lose if they honored him? They will therefore be judged with a more severe sentence than Pilate's, for they are worse than him in my Son's sight. For Pilate judged him because of the request and will of others, and due to fear. But these judge him for their own advantage, and without any fear, when they dishonor him by committing the sin that they could abstain from if they wanted. But they do not abstain from sin, nor are they ashamed of the sins that they have done. For they do not consider that they are unworthy of the good deeds of the one whom they do not serve. They are also worse than Judas, for when Judas had betrayed his Lord, he knew very well that he was God, and that he had sinned heavily against him. But he despaired and hastened his days towards hell, thinking himself to be unworthy to live. But these know their sin very well, and yet they continue in it without feeling any remorse about it in their hearts. They want to take the kingdom of heaven with violence and power, when they think they can get it, not through their good deeds, but through a vain hope. But it is only given to those who work and suffer something for the sake of God. They are also worse than those who crucified my Son. For when these saw the good works of my Son, namely, the raising of the dead and the cleansing of lepers, they thought to themselves, "This man does unheard of and extraordinary miracles. He overcomes anyone he wants with a word. He knows all of our thoughts, and he does whatever he wants. If he is successful, we will have to submit to his power and become his subjects." Therefore, in order to avoid being subjected to him, they crucified him because of their envy. But if they had known that he was the King of glory, they never would have crucified him. But these people see his great deeds and miracles every day, and they take advantage of his good deeds, and hear how they should serve him and come to him. But they think to themselves, "If we must leave all our temporal belongings and follow his will and not our own, it would be heavy and unbearable." They despise his will, so that it should not be placed over their own will, and crucify my Son through their hardened heart, when they add sin upon sin against their conscience. They are worse than those who crucified my Son, for the Jews did it for the sake of envy, because they did not know that he was God. But these know him to be God, and yet, in their own malice and presumption and greed, they crucify him spiritually, more cruelly than the Jews did physically. For they themselves have been redeemed, but the Jews had not yet been redeemed. Therefore, my bride, obey my Son and fear him, for just as he is merciful, he is also just. The most pleasant conversation of God the Father with the Son, and about how the Father gave the new bride to the Son, and how the Son received her with pleasure to himself, and about how the bridegroom teaches the bride about patience, obedience, and simplicity, through an example. Chapter 38. The Father spoke to the Son, saying, "I came with love to the Virgin, and took your true body from her. You are therefore in me, and I in you. Just as fire and heat are never separated, so it is impossible to separate the divinity from the manhood. The Son answered, May all glory and honor be to you, Father. May your will be done in me, and mine in you. The Father answered him again, Behold, my Son, I am entrusting this new bride to you, like a sheep to be guided and educated. As the owner of the sheep, you will get from her cheese to eat and milk to drink, and wool to clothe yourself with. But you, bride, should obey him. You have 3 things you must do. You have to be patient, obedient, and willing to do what is good. Then the Son said to the Father, Your will with power, power with humility, humility with wisdom, wisdom with mercy. May your will be done, which is and always will be without beginning or end in me. I take her to myself into my love, into your power, and into the guidance of the Holy Spirit, which are not 3 gods, but one God. Then the Son said to his bride, You have heard how the Father entrusted you to me like a sheep. You must therefore be simple-minded and patient like a sheep, and fruitful in producing food and clothing. 3 people are in the world. The first is completely naked, the second is thirsty, and the third is hungry. The first signifies the faith of my church, and it is naked because everyone is ashamed and afraid to speak the true faith and of my commandments. And if some people do speak or teach about such things, they are despised and accused of being liars. Therefore, my words which proceed from my mouth should clothe this faith like wool. For just as wool grows on the body of a sheep by heat, so too my words proceed from the heat of my divinity and manhood to your heart. They will clothe my holy faith with the testimony of truth and wisdom, and prove that the faith which is now regarded as vain is true, so that the ones who, up to now, have been lazy in clothing their faith in deeds of love, after hearing my words of love, will be converted and enkindled again in order to speak with certitude of faith and act with power. The second one signifies my friends who have a thirsting desire to make my honor perfect and are saddened at my dishonor. They shall be filled with the sweetness that they heard in my words, and enkindled with a greater love for me, and along with them, others who are now dead in sin will also be enkindled in my love, when they hear of the mercy I have done with sinners. The third one signifies those who think thus in their hearts. If only we knew the will of God and how we should live, and if anyone taught us about the good way, we would gladly do what we could for the honor of God. These are hungry to get to know my way and will, but no one feeds them, since no one shows them completely what they should do, and if they are shown or taught what to do, no one lives according to the words with their deeds. And for this reason, the words seem as dead to them. Therefore, I myself shall show and teach them what they should do, and I will fill them with my sweetness. For worldly things, which are seen and desired now almost by everyone, cannot fill mankind, but only arouse his desire and greed of the world to win more and more things. But my words and my love will feed men, and fill them with an overflowing consolation. Therefore, my bride, who are my sheep, you must take great care to keep your patience and obedience. You are all mine by right, and should therefore follow my will. The one who wants to follow the will of another should have 3 things. First, he should have the same will and opinion as the other. Second, have similar deeds. Third, he should move away from his enemies. But who are my enemies, if not pride and every sin? You should therefore move away from them, if you desire to follow my will. Christ speaks about how faith, hope, and love were found perfectly in him at the moment of his death, and are found imperfectly in us wretches. Chapter 39. The Son of God said, I had 3 things in my death. First, faith, when I bent my knees and prayed to the Father, knowing that he was able to save me from the suffering. Second, hope, when I steadfastly waited and said, not as I will. Third, love, when I said, thy will be done. I also had bodily agony from the natural fear of suffering when the sweat of blood went out of my body. Thus, in order that my friends should not fear that they are abandoned when the moment of tribulation comes to them, I showed them in myself that the weak flesh always flees from suffering. But now you may ask how the sweat of blood went out of my body. Just like the blood of a sick person dries up and is consumed in all his veins, so was my blood consumed by the natural fear of death. My Father wanted to show the way by which heaven would be opened, and the exiled man to be able to enter therein, and therefore he delivered me out of love to my suffering in order that my body would be glorified in honor after the suffering had been fulfilled. For justice did not allow my manhood to enter into glory without suffering, although I was able to do so by the power of my divinity. How then should those deserve to enter into my glory who have little faith, vain hope, and no love? If they believed in the eternal joy of heaven and in the horrific torments of hell, they would desire nothing but me. If they believed that I see and know all things, and have power over all things, and that I demand a judgment over all, they would hate the world, and they would fear more to sin before me than before men. If they had a firm and steadfast hope, then their every thought and desire would be directed towards me. If they had a divine love for me, then they would at least think in their soul about what I did for their sake, how much I labored in preaching, how great my pain was in my suffering, and how great my love was at my death when I preferred to die rather than to lose and forsake them. But their faith is sick and wavering, threatening to fall soon, because they believe only when suffering and temptation does not attack them, and they lose their hope as soon as they are met with adversity. Their hope is vain, because they hope that their sin will be forgiven without justice and a right judgment. They hope with self-reliance to receive the kingdom of heaven for nothing, and wish to receive my mercy without the severity of justice. Their love for me is completely cold, for they are never enkindled in seeking or calling me, unless they are forced to it by tribulation. How can I be warmed by such people who have neither a right faith, nor a firm hope, nor a burning love for me? And therefore, when they cry out to me and say, O God, have mercy on me, they do not deserve to be heard, or to enter into my glory, since they did not want to follow their Lord in suffering. And therefore, they should not follow him to the glory. For no knight can please his Lord and be taken back into his mercy after his fall, unless he first humbles himself in penance for his contempt. End of chapters 37 to 39 from Book 1 of Prophecies and Revelations by St. Bridget of Sweden. Welcome to the Virgo Potens YouTube channel. If you enjoy this video, give it a like. I also invite you to subscribe to this channel so that you won't miss new content. Please prayerfully consider supporting my work by becoming a patron of Virgo Potens on Patreon and/or by buying one of my books. My ebooks are available on Amazon as well as on the Apple Bookstore. For those who prefer a physical copy rather than an ebook, my book, Spiritual Warfare, Know Thy Enemy, is also available as a paperback on Amazon. If you are interested in making a one-time contribution, I suggest that you do so by simply buying one of my books. I am thankful for your support. Links to Patreon and to my books will be posted in the comments section of this video. The continuation of this work isn't possible without you. Lastly, and most importantly, please pray for me. May the Virgin Most Powerful guide and protect you.